Hello, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's April 1st, and today we're going to take a look at the Astrology of April. So every month, right around the first of the month, I do a live Facebook feed taking a look at the astrology of the month ahead. So today, being April 1st and Easter, happy Easter to everybody who celebrates, we'll be looking at all of the major astrological transits for the month of April. So as usual, I always like to issue a little disclaimer and say that, every astrologer is a little bit different, depending on a lot of different factors. Some astrologers may really focus on some transits versus other transits. So every month I try to focus on the transits that I think are the most important for the month ahead. But, it's always good if you're a student of astrology to find a few different voices that you like, because not only will different astrologers focus on different transits for the month ahead, maybe giving you a slightly different set of considerations for each month as you're studying or paying attention to the planets, but each astrologer is also has a different mood and a different feeling about how they do astrology and why, and kind of what to look for in the month ahead. So at any rate, as the month of April gets started today, in particular, we have Mars coming together to conjoin Saturn. So we're going to talk about that first. But we also have Mercury cazimi with the Sun today. So those are two big transits to start the month off with right away. So let's talk about Mars, Saturn, and Capricorn. So first of all, these are two very powerful planets at the moment because Mars is in its exaltation in Capricorn and Saturn is in its rulership in Capricorn. So you really have two planets that are very comfortable in the sign of Capricorn, and therefore they're going to be quite productive. So one of the key words for this transit is productivity, results. But you have also two very different kinds of archetypal expressions with Mars and Saturn. I've been told that Alan Oken was the first one to coin the term driving with the brakes on, which I heard a few times in the last week or so talking about this transit with colleagues. But Mars is the planet that represents aggression and basically putting your foot on the gas pedal, whereas Saturn is really, more like the brakes. So, you put them together and you get that phrase, driving with the brakes on. So that's one phrase that works really well for Mars Saturn, where there can be a feeling of wanting to go ahead at a very strong, determined, or deliberate pace. Let's say you're in business and you're trying to move forward with something, and you've all the pieces are in place. You know where you want to go. You know what you'd like to see done. You have a project. You have a deadline. You have something that's causing you to want to move forward with a lot of vigor and force. But meeting with Saturn is going to be that quality that says, wait a second, there's a little roadblock here, or there's some kind of aspect of the process that has been overlooked, or there's some need for a more conservative approach that Mars has to be married to. So, for example, you have sometimes people will say that in the beginning of learning a musical instrument, for example, it's a pretty easy analogy. When you're learning a musical instrument, in the very beginning of learning, you have to practice your scales, and you have to practice them very, very slowly. And beginning students, like myself, when I was young, I'm thinking about learning guitar or piano or something like that. You want to speed ahead and rush through the scales like as quickly as you can. Because you kind of get the hang of them. So you think, oh, I'll just fly. I'll start flying through these. Once my hand knows it, then I'll just start flying. But then what happens is you're not learning how to sort of enunciate or articulate each specific note, or each specific. As a writer, sometimes it's each specific word. So you get ahead of yourself, right? And then your teacher will say, nope, slow down, slow down, slow down. The speed comes with time. So you can't, with Mars, Saturn, it's very similar. You can't get where you want to go right now, even though you know where you want to go, even though you know the destination, you can almost see it. You have to be willing to commit to the process. And So there's great productivity here, but also a kind of a need for a conservative approach. So that's kind of the combination of Mars and Saturn. You also have a kind of pressure cooker feeling with Mars and Saturn, where there's the feeling of sometimes it's militaristic, or it's a little authoritarian, or it's the control freak in us can come out a little bit under Mars Saturn conjunction. So stress, pressure, busy, focused, and you think also about authority, reputability, and the kind of dignity or pride that we take in a job well done, in a job that's been carefully, effectively, and also done in an efficient kind of as fast as we can without cutting any corners. There's also this general theme that there are no shortcuts. That's Mars Saturn coming together into a conjunction. There are no shortcuts. Whatever you want to do, you have to do it in a way that is, it's bona fide, and it's real, and it's careful, and there's no shortcuts. So you got that kind of feeling to Mars Saturn as well. Now, Mars Saturn can also be about the analysis of a system. So where Saturn represents the vastness of an institution, for example, law. It's a sort of the general body of law, or the legal institution, or the general body of Christian theology, or the general body of Western philosophy, as a kind of vast, solid, historic, daunting system of information and tradition and figures and dates and times and the intricacies of the law or the legal institution. That's Saturn. When you get to Mars, though, you're talking about a quality of cutting or dividing things. So cutting into things and trying to, in a sense, analyze, break apart, or divide systems. So systems analysis. I can't tell you how many people I see in the tech world, or I've seen mathematicians, scientists, people that have Mars-Saturn combinations, because there's this ability to really divide, cut, and examine the inner workings of vast systems, especially systems that have a certain amount of authority or history or tradition behind them. And that's also, this is also a good transit for questioning, or for quality control, for questioning people who are in authority, for the review of productivity, like if you have a productivity review at work or something like that. It's very Mars Saturn. Or for someone to say, there's a deadline and I need it done this way, and I need it done now, and it has to be perfect. And then that the ability to just kind of tunnel vision your way through something. All Mars Saturn stuff. All right, so meanwhile, Mercury is Cazimi today. These two big transits to start off the month. And then on April 5th, Mercury is going to square Saturn. So we have a process going on right now with Mercury and Saturn as well. Mercury Cazimi today is very powerful. It's an empowered moment of speech, for example. So, don't be surprised today if the power and remember, the sun is exalted in Aries. So the kind of power and oomph that's with the sun today is going to be giving the seal of the king over to Mercury. So when Mercury is at the center of the sun in an exact conjunction, it's as though Mercury is given the seal of the ambassador of the king as an ambassador to the queen. So when you're in a foreign country as an ambassador and you're speaking on behalf of the president, let's say like you're the Secretary of State or something like that, you're treated like you're the president, and your word and your negotiating power is on behalf of the presidency. So that's kind of a good analogy for what it's like when Mercury is Cazimi, and all the more so in Aries, which is very authoritative and powerful. So you think about empowered speech and people saying incisive, intense, powerful things, possibly domineering, but also the ability to say things that maybe you're scared to say, maybe to say things that are a little, normally you'd be more passive, but today you may find that there's a little bit more fire behind you and your words. You also want to be careful, of course, of, you can be persuasive, but also overpowering or domineering. And so that's also something to be very careful of. Don't be too rigid as well, because over the next 4 or 5 days, Mercury is going to be moving backward into a square with Saturn, which can be about the process of basically coming to solidify thoughts, feelings, ideas, strategies. So for some thoughts or mercurial-like things, which can be anything ranging from communication, ideas or strategies, negotiation or speech, something that you're learning or something that you're putting into practice, a particular technical skill, all of those kinds of mercurial things coming backward into Saturn can mean that perhaps, for example, you've been revising something, rethinking something, visiting something from the past, and as you've done so, you're moving toward a moment of solidification or crystallization. So that's happening as Mercury reverses back into the square with Saturn over the next 4 or 5 days. And but you want to be careful, because the other thing is that with Mercury in Aries and Saturn in Capricorn, again, it can be overly rigid, overly conservative, domineering. It can be about power. You can very easily seduce yourself into believing that the best idea that you have in your mind about anything, the best strategy, the best whatever, well, you can convince yourself that it's it's the best thing in the world, right? But if it can still be coming from a place that's very egotistical, or that's about dominating or controlling other people or a situation, or coming out on top somehow. So, and we can very easily with Mercury Saturn convince ourselves that whatever we're doing is actually the most logical, thoughtful, intelligent thing that we could possibly do. But reasonableness doesn't mean that something is really being examined in the heart. So you have to examine your thoughts and the certainties that you're coming to in the next 4 or 5 days. Examine them against, weigh them against the reality of your heart. What does your heart feel? Is your heart on board with what you're saying or doing or thinking or strategizing? The other thing about Mercury Saturn over the next 5 days is that you're also coming into maybe a space of doubt. Maybe there's been a breakdown of something mercurial. And as the square to Saturn is reached, Mercury is also going to be starting to station, gradually starting to slow down and get to its turnaround point. It's going to be kind of dancing with Saturn for a while. So, and with Mars as well. So as it comes through the square to both Saturn and Mars, you're looking at the possibility for confrontations or breakdowns of communication, or confrontations or breakdowns of your own thoughts, feelings, ideas about things. The way that you process and receive information or communicate with others, if it needs some revision, if there's a tendency to be really selfish or to be really controlling, those things, especially right now, great opportunity to kind of soften the heart and really look at those things, because this transit will amplify those tendencies within us. You want to also be careful, because this transit may have the tendency to represent being dominated by other people, where other people want to kind of control the way you think or control the way you talk, or basically submissiveness and control and domination are all themes of this transit. At the same time, this is a great transit for if you need to reorganize, re-strategize, review something and change the form of the way that you're doing something or thinking or communicating. Again, really an effective time for that. Now, going forward between April 7th and April 11th, Venus is going to be moving. Well, Venus has just entered Taurus, right? So check the whole sign house, the Taurus rules in your birth chart. Wherever Taurus has just entered, you got some kind of, some wind in your sails wherever the benefics are moving. So, but between April 7th and 11th, Venus in Taurus will be making a trine to Saturn and Mars in Capricorn. So that energy of productivity is going to get a boost from Venus for a little bit too. So this is potentially a very productive, like think of spring cleaning, beautifying, doing any kind of work that, any kind of work or looking to achieve some hard results, Saturn, Mars, but that have a Venetian influence, right? So negotiating something among friends or people in a way that's pleasing and satisfying to everybody, crafting something that's beautiful, redecorating your home, changing something, beautifying something, Venus is in the mix of this productivity energy this month. So it's a really nice influence. At the same time, during that same little window, Venus will be moving in between the malefics, which means that Venus will be entrapped between the malefics. Now it's by a trine. So here's what can happen. You want to help. You desire to be of service, but you end up getting stuck in something that you not something that you bargained for. You know what I mean? So be careful. It's this kind of buyer beware moment where be careful of what you get involved with. Something that looks good, that looks promising, that makes you feel like you're helping or you're moving somewhere, getting some kind of beautiful, nice result. But then you can get stuck in the midst of something that's a little complicated, and that's just for a little bit. Ultimately, Venus is also bringing Mars and Saturn together, so there's lessons to be learned, and ultimately harmony that's can be achieved at this time between April 7th and 11th. But you may also have to be careful of sort of like trying to do good or trying to get involved with something that becomes a little complicated. So think about that between April 7th and 11th. But otherwise, again, a very good transit for just productivity and making things effective and beautiful through hard work and compromise. Now, between April 16th and 17th, go back down one. Let's go to April 10th and 11th, same time as the Venus trine to Mars and Saturn is taking place. The Sun in Aries is going to square Pluto. Now that's a big one that usually has mundane results where you see it in the world. Like whenever there's like a Sun-Pluto opposition or square throughout the year, or even a conjunction, you usually see big news about people in power, usually specifically men. So going back, for example, to Libra season, when you go back to Libra season and the Sun Pluto square during Libra season, you had the Me Too movement with Harvey, what's the guy's name? Weinstein? I think that's his name. The big movie exec who basically everyone started coming out about his sexual abuse. So that's Sun, the authority figure, and often the paternal or the male authority figure, meeting with Pluto, which is like, Pluto's the karmic expiration date, when it's time for something to change, when it's time for something to die, and when it's time for something to go through a process of catharsis, a fated moment of death and rebirth or transformation. So the April 10th and 11th zone this month, you've got the Sun and Pluto in this powerful square. So you really want to pay attention to those dates as times where, again, if you're riding on a high horse, that'll that's something that'll knock you off. If you're flying too high, it'll clip your wings, or it'll your wings will melt like Icarus. You'll fall. So pride cometh before a fall for that transit. You want to be very careful. It's also potentially one of those transits where it's like, I want to be Superman. There's something really heroic about the transit, but have to be careful about what the motives are. A lot of what we're sold in the media constantly is about the virtues of heroism. Like we're told from the time that we're very young that really the purpose of life is to become a hero. But the hero is a really singular figure. A hero is not usually a relational figure. The hero is adored and sort of worshipped, but stands at the top. You know what I mean? They're kind of it's a picture of individualism, and behind that is sometimes a very deep form of narcissism, right? So heroism is often common and unseen, and it is not worshipped or revered. It's humble, it's modest, it's done in the secret, it's done anonymously, and it's not something to build our egos upon. Being a good person is not something to get a medal about. You know what I mean? And and I'm saying these things specifically to tune us into some of the deeper lessons of the Sun Pluto, where there's something in us that wants to rise above and be recognized. And there's something, even if what we're doing is good, or there's some external appearance of virtue, surrounding what we're trying to do with our lives, Pluto's sun will really potentially check us and be like, just make sure that what you're doing is not really about you, that it doesn't come back to like trying to feed the ever hungry ego, So some good ability for the ego to be humbled or to be put in service of something bigger than itself. But be careful around that time of the subtleness of the ego as well. Pluto, which is representative of Hades, rules the underworld. And one of the things to remember about the underworld is that it is invisible to our eyes. It's present here with us. It's not under the earth, right? The underworld is here, but it's related to the unconscious and to motives or forces that are very invisible or intangible to our normal senses. So you have to be really careful of that too. But you'll also see issues with power or authority around that time, just generally speaking. And in the news, it's a good time to hone your transit watching abilities by watching the news and seeing what happens to people in power around that time. Then between April 16th and 17th, that's when Venus in Taurus is going to oppose Jupiter in Scorpio. So then you've got an opposition of the benefics in the middle of the month, which is actually really nice. We'll talk about that. But sometimes people don't realize that the opposition of the benefics is still an opposition, and therefore there can be some challenges to watch out for as well. But it's a really nice transit, generally speaking. So Venus opposite Jupiter you got two planets that were traditionally associated with life-giving qualities, heat and moisture, the qualities that are needed for plants to grow. So if you think about plants growing in the jungle, and you think about the kinds of conditions that they need for life, they need their sunlight, or the forest, jungle, whatever. They need they need rain and moisture, and they need they need heat. So those are the qualities traditionally associated with Venus and Jupiter that were a part of why they were called benefics originally. Why are they called benefic planets? Because benefic planets are associated with conditions that make life flourish and grow. So you have two planets opposing one another, meaning they're generating a certain kind of tension, creative tension in the opposition. However, they're also, so it's about life, and it's about the tension that's necessary to create life. Venus is about harmonizing things, bringing unlike things together, and Jupiter is about making larger wholes and basically expanding things, making things bigger. But also Jupiter inspires faith. Venus is about beauty. Venus is about cleanliness. Jupiter is about belief, giving your heart fully to something. So those qualities coming together in a kind of a tense but really growth-oriented moment. It's really a time to see things flourish and grow. And the best place to understand, or the best way to understand how that's happening, is again to look at the Taurus and Scorpio whole sign houses of your birth chart. Or if you don't know, if you're using like Placidus houses or something, then just look at the opposition degree. Let me just get that for you. So the opposition degree, maybe about 21 degrees. It's about 20, yeah, it's just about 21 degrees of Taurus and Scorpio. So you can check that degree out, those degrees in your chart, and that's where to look in terms of where this force of life and growth is happening. Now, if you want to know something kind of interesting, by contrast, think of the qualities that were assigned to the malefics. Saturn was considered excessively cold and dry, wintry, and Mars excessively hot and dry. Those are the conditions that kill plant life. If it's too hot and too dry, or if it's too cold and too dry, things die. So that's why those planets were, for example, that's part of why they were called malefics. We have to have planets that represent all the different cycles of the Tao, so to speak, the birth and the death, the rejuvenation and the disintegration. So however, the thing that you want to be careful of, I said there's something to be careful of with the benefic transit of Venus opposite Jupiter. So Venus opposite Jupiter, it's about life and proliferation of life. However, what goes up must come down, right? So there's a tendency for extravagance, for like anything that just goes over the top, that gets too excited, that spends too much money, that gets conceited or vain or high on itself, it's possible to, despite what, some people would say, you can't stay high forever. Like in the material world, anything that you do, materially speaking, to try and satisfy your desire for happiness is temporary. So this is why in spiritual life, we try to train ourselves to find equanimity and happiness in from the standpoint of our consciousness or our soul, because from the soul's position, the things that go up, the things that come down, we try to remain equiposed for the ride up and the ride down. So it's not that you're supposed to shun the world, but you also don't want to get sort of jerked around and a roller coaster ride that ends up, torquing your neck and your back, and that you end up feeling perturbed by the things that are supposed to make you happy, and then endlessly confused, and from confusion comes anger and frustration, and then more desire, and the cycle perpetuates itself and gets pretty nasty. So the benefics, when they come together in an opposition, they're also representing potentially a state of the extreme, and the potential to look at life, growth, addition, so whether that's sexual or financial, or if it's about material possessions or good food or what, so those conditions of Jupiter and Venus can sort of populate your life with really nice things. But just remember that, again, from a spiritual standpoint, we're not supposed to get caught up in that or the bad stuff. It's easy nobody likes, in a session, when I do sessions with people, nobody likes to hear about Saturn entering a house. Like, oh, it's going to be hard work. You're going to go through some maturity, some maturing that you need to do here, or whatever. It's like Saturn's like, oh man, or Mars, like, might be a little intense, might feel sort of agitated, might have some confrontations in relationships. Mars in your 7th house or something. Oh my God, oh, I don't want to deal with that. It's like, what can I do to avoid that? How do I get through it? But if you say Jupiter's entering your 10th house, Venus is entering your 2nd house of money. Oh, your career is going to grow. You're going to get a promotion. Then people instantly, no one wants to know how to navigate that. No one's like, oh, how do I navigate that? Immediately, no. If Jupiter's entering my career house, well, it's destiny. I'm a chosen person. It's like good karma, or it's, nobody's asking like, okay, how can I be very careful not to get caught up and lost in that windfall of money, or that promotion, or that expansiveness that's coming my way. No one's actually worried about that. That's exactly what we should be worried about. We should be, no one should be like sitting around just being worried all the time, first of all, but we shouldn't get caught up in either. And we should be asking ourselves, how do I stay peaceful in my heart, and stay in the seat of love in my heart, regardless if I get a promotion, or if I get a lot of money, or if, I fall in love, or someone gives me something nice, or, it works out the way I want it to, or if it doesn't. The real question of astrology is, how can I use the information that I'm being given by the stars to stay in the seat of love in my heart? This information is helping us stay there by having reflective awareness that we can bring into the experiences. We recognize it. We say, oh, there's Venus and Jupiter. Oh, that's really lovely. That's like a nice spring day. Well, you can enjoy spring days just as long as you don't build the platform of your happiness on it, because eventually the autumn is coming. You know what I mean? So that's the main thing to think about with the opposition of the benefics. The other thing is that we with the benefic planets and the opposition between them, we do a lot of things to try and manipulate our way into happiness. Venus and Jupiter opposite can also be about the kinds of compromises we're willing to make to get what we want, to use or be used, to manipulate or coerce in the name of something good that we want, or that we think we all need, or you scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of thing, favors this. So you have to be very careful about the I like to say sometimes that when the benefics get together, sometimes it's like House of Cards, if you've ever seen that show, where there's lots of people who are kind of doing favors for one another, and it's all in the name of something good. But there's really a lot of selfishness behind it as well. And that's why we all kind of groan when we think about the charming politician. Like, you're saying it right, like you're giving money to good things, you care about good things, but like you're also taking a bunch of money from the banks, or just that kind of like that element of compromise surrounded by the facade of goodness. You want to be very careful of that when the benefics get together in an opposition. All right, so April 18th, the sun will conjoin Uranus. That's a time of breakthrough, rebellion, enlightenment, understanding, aha moments. You want to be very careful not to burn bridges. You may get the impulse to totally change or revise or, shift something very suddenly. That's good if something needs changing, that's how it goes. But remember that the high of rebellion usually leads to the low of a new dictatorship. Meaning the thing that we think is going to liberate us, again, when we associate anything in the material world and we say, oh, that's the thing that's going to do it once and for all. If I just, kick this person out of my life, if I just slam the door and quit my job, if I'm doing something that's really defiant and it feels revolutionary and good, just remember that if it's good enough, then it's good enough to be done in a way that's virtuous and done with integrity. Because if some rebellion in our life is going to happen, and it's got to be really forced and angry and intense, and we're not careful about how we do it, we're just riding high on the principle that it's time or it's the right thing or whatever, usually then there's a kind of ruthlessness behind that'll end up taking the seat of power next. So it looks like something that's, again, very virtuous with Sun Uranus, the best idea in the world, it's time to be free, throw off the shackles of something, time to invent, time to discover. I have the best idea in the world. If it's not integrated and performed from the heart and from the space of love, which is not easy, but that's the practice, then again, what'll happen is that thing that doesn't have time for the consideration of love will end up becoming a dictator, no matter how free it looks. And that's what we've learned from lots of major revolutions in the world, French and American revolutions, you can go on and on. Revolutionary spirit is not above deterioration, because all energies in the material world cycle through highs and lows repeatedly. So just remember that. It's kind of the lesson. If you ever read the I Ching as a Chinese oracle, that's basically what the I Ching says behind every single stage of life. It's like, here's the stage you're in, and it'll become its opposite. So anyway, then the last big transit that I wanted to talk about is just April 15th, right around the same time the sun conjoins Uranus, there'll be a very powerful new moon where the new moon is conjoining with Uranus and in a pretty close square to Pluto. So that new moon this month is a very powerful new chapter that's opening up, and it's going to have that Uranus-Pluto dynamic to it. It's revolutionary, it's cathartic, it's fated, and it's liberating. It's enlightening, but it's also about death and rebirth. So the powerful new moon that surrounds that Uranus-Sun conjunction, the new moon on the 15th, and then the Sun-Uranus conjunction on the 18th. Last but not least, Mars will conjoin with Pluto in Capricorn on April 26th. That's a big deal because, and sorry, I should back up just a second before I go to Mars conjoining Pluto. The new moon and the Sun-Uranus conjunction is also happening right around the time that Mercury is turning direct. So it's sort of moving forward again. So again, the middle of the month, that new moon is a really big time, and the first couple of days after the new moon as well. Expect to also see around that time potentially more of the same kind of turmoil and confrontation with the political turmoil in the news. That's going to be a big moment for the sort of global story. April 26th, Mars will conjoin with Pluto. And there you have this very productive, elevated, exalted Mars in Capricorn meeting with this super explosive Pluto. So that is a moment of intense catharsis. If you've been working really, really hard at something, expect a breakthrough. If you've been working too hard, expect breakdown. If there's some kind of confrontation that needs to be had, especially look at the Capricorn area of your chart, you think about breakdown and breakthrough, transformation, a fated event, and it's an intense one. Mars-Pluto is like sort of nuclear. So that's a very powerful moment that ends the month. And around that time, you can expect that you will see powerful transformations that compel and they may inspire courage and action, a transformation of intent, or your willpower is it's Pluto can give your willpower like almost like a supercharge. So you have to be careful also, because you kind of bulldoze and steamroll people and then lead to hurt and pain and stuff like that. So that's a very powerful transit though for catharsis, and where there is something that needs to be confronted or addressed and changed. So that's April 26th. So that's what I've got for you guys today. I hope that you enjoyed this. Are there any questions that I can take from people? If so, please feel free to put them in the box. I don't see any right now, but if you have questions, you're also free to email me. I'd be happy to try and address some of your questions and some of the horoscopes that I do this month. In the meantime, I hope you all have a very happy Easter, and if you celebrate Easter. And I also want to point you to my website, which I just put into the chat box. It's www.nightlightastrology.com. On June 10th, Sundays from noon Eastern to 2 p.m. Eastern, which is about 6 to 8 if you live in the UK, or 9 to 11 if you live on the West Coast, I will be leading a 1-year-long Ancient Astrology for Modern Times course, which is all about Hellenistic astrology, traditional medieval astrology, and learning basically how to read birth charts from a traditional standpoint. But it's also a course that's about trying to integrate some of the virtues and values of both modern forms of astrology, like evolutionary or psychological astrology, with old forms like Hellenistic astrology. The first 6 months we study theory. The second 6 months you get to observe the theory put into action with live clients, which I think is really, it's an amazing opportunity. If you're someone who wants to learn more about reading charts, develop your studies, it's a good course to both learn the theory history, and philosophy of astrology from the starting era of astrology up to the present. But also getting to see hands-on readings and get a feel for how to put these things into action, and that may help you develop your own practice as well. Okay, that's what I've got. So have a very happy Easter and a very lovely month of April. Oh, and if you want, you can also see your monthly sun sign horoscope column by visiting astrograph.com. I write a guest column every month breaking down the month ahead for your sun sign. So if you want to check out your sun signs report for the month, all of the transits that I just went through, I break down. You can look at your sun sign, your moon sign, or your rising sign and read the column that I wrote for each sign. All right, take care, guys. Have a good one. Bye.